What up, my dog? Go and tell them I'd preach a philosophical speaker. Bim! Ink bleeds on the fabric of a blank projection, a conceptual murder of the soul's reflection. They write the law that erase the essence, reducing a God to a physical presence. Paper genocide, the slaughter of the formless, binding the infinite, making us normless. A birth certificate anchors the timeless mind to a fiction of state, to a cage design. They file a spirit under corporate names, a holographic slaughtering bureaucratic gains. But you cannot murder what was never born. I read the pages of the narrative torn. I am everyone and no one, yet I am someone. I am everyone and no one, yet I am someone.
Unless
The
you have
ledger tries to quantify the boundless spark, leaving dead silhouettes frozen in the dark. They execute the archetype to feed the machine, a digital eclipse of the space between. The contract planes, ownership of vital breath, an ontological warfare, a semantic death. But the witness remains when the pages burn. To the primal awareness, the atoms return. We are not the ink, we are the space on the page, breaking the spell of the literal gauge. The parchment is off, the illusion is done. The many merge back into the absolute one. I am every none and no one, yet I am someone. I am every none and no one, yet I am someone. Monets trapped in the matrix of the legal fiction, a paper genocide executed through strict restriction. The strawman is birth, a synthetic astral double, biting the mana to the lower realms of trouble. They seal the demiurge's ledger with a silver wax, taxing the breath of life to bureaucratic attacks. A semantic assassination on a parchment scroll, replacing the infinite logos with a numbered soul. The birth certificate acts as an necrotic shroud, an ontological eclipse hiding the witness in the cloud. But the Gnosis fractures the geometry of the state as I dissolve the contracts of this artificial fate. I am everyone and no one, yet I am someone. I am everyone and no one, yet I am someone. Of a burning Akashic tree, and attempt to codify the columns of the cosmic sea. They use the alphabet to cast an execution spell, locking the primordial spark inside the legal cell. This is the slaughter of the formless by the rigid line, a holographic murder of the template divine. At the void laughs loud at the notary Silva. No, the parchment can dominate what is real. I am the uncarved block before the glyphs were made, the immutable witness when the paper shadows fade. The bureaucracy crumbles under Kabbalistic fire as the monarch rises higher than the tall empire. I am everyone and no one, and I am someone. I am everyone and no one, yet I am someone.
Jehová, pura vida, mi gente. Yeah, finally see somebody in the live chat. How you guys doing? Yeah, thanks for tuning in. Appreciate you guys making the time to be here. I guess notifications ain't going out, but no, you're right on time. You're right on time. We haven't started yet, so shout out to Mad Preacher, that introduction, that song in the beginning. Shout out to Mad Preacher for that. All right. We're going to go into another part of history regarding the Sephardic Jews, you know, where they ended up as well. It's not just in Europe, not just in the Americas, but also in West Africa, okay? And there's a lot of misconceptions about the whole, you know, so-called Jewishness in West Africa. So this is literally the main component of this Jewishness in West Africa, which is Sephardic Jews who actually fled the Inquisition, right? The Spanish Catholic Inquisition from Spain and Portugal, the Iberian Peninsula, and fled also to West African ports, coast, and they settled there, and they were able to be open Jews, so-called Jews, right? Open, practice their faith. They didn't have to be cryptos anymore. They didn't have to be secret. They can build their synagogues. They can perform their rituals, ceremonies, everything in the open. So today we're going to get into a book we're going to be evaluating, reviewing. We're going to get into the first part of this book. All right, I'm going to show you that book right now. 1 second. So I appreciate you guys taking the time to be here. And this book is The Forgotten Diaspora, Jewish Communities in West Africa and the Making of the Atlantic World, by Peter Mark from Wesleyan University in Connecticut and José da Silva Horta, University of Lisbon in Portugal. All right, that's what we're going to get into. That's what we're going to get into. All right, we're going to go into chapter 1. Review, fair use, educational purposes, commentary, critique. Again, just for learning, right? We're learning. So we're going to chapter 1. We're not going to go on to it yet. Before I do that, just want to go ahead and hold up. Where's the other one? I got another window open. I got you guys. Here we go. So just the other day, right? Just the other day, we uploaded this video, The Hidden Jewish and Moorish Networks That Shaped History, right? About 3 days ago. I'm going to play a little bit of this video because we're talking about Portuguese Jews. You got to have the right context because we're talking about Black folks. We're talking about Black Europeans who are going into West Africa. Black Europeans going into West Africa. Can the live chat confirm? Can you guys hear me? The live chat, can you guys hear me? Or are we just paying so much attention? We only got 37 people right now, but I know eventually the whole world is gonna care about this info. Right now, they don't care. All right, but the whole world is gonna care about this info soon. It's not just about Indians, not just about the Americas, the whole world. We gotta learn the whole context, the whole history. You gotta understand why DNA tests are trying to say you're related to people in West Africa. You gotta understand the whole concept of this diaspora of Sephardic Jews and Moors going into West Africa, and also the American Colonization Society. The American Colonization Society. Who really colonized West Africa? So the other day we went over this information regarding the Sephardic Jews, right? And I'm gonna play a little bit while we let people come in, because a lot of people are late. We're gonna play this while people come in, all right? Appreciate you guys. I'm gonna read from this book right here real quick, just to corroborate. It says, The Natural History of Man, comprising inquiries into the modifying influence of physical and moral agencies of the different tribes of the human family, by James Cowles Pritchard. All right. And this is volume 1,
all the way 1855. The Jews of Portugal are very dark. The Jews of Portugal are very dark. Again, the Jews of Portugal are very dark. All right, we're going to be talking about the Spaniard and Sephardic Jews of Portugal, and how I'm going to, been letting you know, a lot of these became Huguenots. A lot of these ended up in Holland, the Netherlands, becoming known as Dutch and having influence in the West Indian Company and the trade around the world, the ships and everything, and pirates, merchants. Again, these same people we're talking about were very dark-skinned people, so-called Negroes. It says Shakespeare and the Jews. This is the 20th anniversary edition from James Shapiro. All right, scholarly source here. You can dig on it. All right, and we're about on page 171 of this book. And it says here, the accumulated experience of over 100 years of travel, trade, and conquest had convinced Europeans that some of the accepted stereotypes of Jewish racial otherness, including the belief that the Jews were black, needed to be qualified when William Brereton jotted down his impressions of the Jews in the synagogue in Amsterdam in 1635. Amsterdam, again, that's in the Netherlands, Holland, all right, the Dutch, this is the Dutch synagogue, Dutch people, right, Amsterdam, 1635. He's going to let you know that he noted that the Jewish men are most black. They're most black, the Jews. Who was the Jews? Again, who was the Jews that were in Amsterdam? Most of those Jews, all right, had fled from Spain and Portugal. Sephardic Jews who were what? Most black. Remember, the Portuguese were very dark. We already read that. All right, you see the corroboration. And when the Scottish minister Robert Kirk toured London in January 1690, he also paid a visit to the synagogue there. Now, this is a whole other different country. Right now, he's in England. Now, a whole different person, letting you know what he saw when he went in the synagogue, the Jewish synagogue in London. All right, in 1690. He observed over 200 Jews worshiping. 200. All right, 200 people, 200 Jews. He noted in his journal that they were all very black men. Again, Jews worshiping in a synagogue in London. They were what? All very black men. All very black men. Sephardic Jews. Who was in London as a Jew? A lot of these, again, were Sephardic Moorish Jews from Portugal and Spain. I read from this book also to corroborate what I'm letting you know, what the general consensus, right? Remember, he was telling us the general consensus during these times. All right, this book is called A System of Geography, or a descriptive, historical, and philosophical view of the several quarters of the world and of the various empires, kingdoms, and republics which they contain, particularly detailing those alterations which have been introduced at the recent revolutions. From 1805, all right, 1805, 49 of this book. And notwithstanding this, it is argued we find them in different parts of the world, of all colors. Jews, what? Jews of all colors. They're come in every color. The English Jew is white. The Portuguese Jew is swarty, so-called black. The Portuguese Jew, swarty, very dark. Portuguese, again, another source. The American Jew, olive. And the Arabian Jew, copper-colored. But they're letting us know in this source from 1805. Portuguese Jews, swarty. All right, I'm going to read from this book real quick. It says Jews and Blacks in the Early Modern World by Jonathan Scorch. All right, Jews and Blacks. But down here it says, towards the latter end of the 18th century, one finds the same changeability of Jews expressed in updated nuances in geographic context. The Reverend Samuel Stanhope Smith wrote that the Jews are fair in Britain and Germany, brown in France. The Jews are what? They're brown skin. They're brown in France, French, Huguenots, and in Turkey, swarty in Portugal. So brown in France and Turkey, and swarty, or so-called black, in Portugal and Spain. They're black in Portugal and Spain. The Jews are black in Portugal and Spain, swarty, black. Olive in Syria and in Chaldea, tawny or copper-colored in Arabia and Egypt. All right, so different shades, all right, of complexion, the Jews. All right, again, another source here. It says, while such views may be passed off as mere descriptive statements about the darkness of Sephardic Jews, the darkness of Sephardic Jews. Sephardic Jews are what? So-called black. They have dark skin. Remember that the Jews of Portugal and Spain, which are the Sephardic Jews, all right, are so-called black. We already got a lot of references, different books. They soon connected intimately with prescriptive notions based on the significance of physiological or racial characteristics. Thus, in 1750, petition from Kingston, Jamaica, Christians objecting to a recent attempt by Jewish landowner to vote, presented the following argument. It says, though a mulatto of the fourth descent may vote at elections, yet the Jews, many of whom are mulattoes of that degree, are by our wise legislation absolutely excluded from that privilege. It says, note the lack of stability in the Jews' color and the overlap of cultural and physiological otherness. Many of the Jews were mulattoes of the fourth degree, that is, very light-skinned blacks. Jews, light-skinned blacks, and hence should have been permitted to vote. But Jews were not Christians. Unlike mulattoes, the religious exclusion of Jews put them on the level of mulattoes and blacks. Jews both were and were not blacks, were and were not whites. These various views of Jews branded them in David Rodiger's terminology as not yet white. This is
So, okay, that was from the other day, okay? We're very clear. The so-called Jews, the Sephardic Jews from Portugal and Spain were swarthy, very dark complexion, so-called black, referenced as Negroes and everything, okay? That's just the main thing to have context with before we continue and read from that book about who's actually going into Senegal and West Africa. This is what I'm trying to make you understand. These are not white, pale-skinned people, Christian, Spaniards, and Portuguese as how they wanted us to think of history. I'm trying to show you something deep here. And for everybody who's new to my channel, I got this playlist right here. It's called Black Europeans History. In case you're having trouble understanding that part, there was so-called Black Europeans. That had nothing to do with Africa. The first Europeans had dark skin. Scientists and genetics prove it. That's the very first video. Check out the very first video. Start right from the beginning, and then you keep going down. There's 194 videos here that you can have context with that'll help you understand what we're saying. All right, and it's all research, all sources. Now we got, you know, another playlist here I want you guys to check out if you're new to my channel, or if you just haven't taken the time, you know, you've been here a while, you just haven't been able to take the time. Africans not from Africa. Very good playlist, and you're going to combine all this info with what we're about to read today, so you can understand who people really are, man. It's not about color. It's not about color when we have so-called black Portuguese and black so-called Jews, right, going into Africa and settling, and they are your so-called Jews, right, and bringing that culture, that identity over there. It wasn't over there like how people try to portray it before they got there. All right, so check out these two playlists. We're gonna go right into the book. Yeah, thank you for being here. But let's not bring up the Chazars, you know, we don't want to. All right, so we're in the book again, The Forgotten Diaspora, Jewish communities in West Africa, right? We're going to start out with chapter 1. It says here, 2 Sephardic communities on Senegal's Petite Côte. And so it starts out with a primary source from, you know, written in Spanish, and then they do the translation right under it, which is right here. Okay, and I'm going to read that part. It says, in this Puerto Dali, there is a community with 100 families. In Portuguese, literally neighbors. Vecinos, that's what they call them, neighbors, which may correspond to persons and or families of Portuguese and blacks, so-called, right? They say Portugueses y negros. So again, that doesn't mean that that's white, and that doesn't mean that the Negroes is the African. They were calling American Indian Negroes. They were calling anybody in a state of servitude Negroes. Remember that. And these so-called Portuguese turned out to be Sephardic Jews, so they were so-called Negroes too. So that doesn't make sense in modern terms, right? They weren't using it based on color back then. It says, to this port came people from Flanders. They came from Flanders, huh? Who professed the law of Moses. And here they do and maintain their rituals and ceremonies like the ones of Judea. Example, the land of the Jews. And for the Portuguese seeking to kill them and expel them, those are the Catholics, from that place ran a serious risk because the king took the side of the Jews and told the Portuguese that this land was a market where all kinds of people had a right to live and that no one would cause disorder in his land. Otherwise, he would order that their heads be cut off. If they wanted to make war, they should make it on the sea, not in his land, which he had already said was a market. Okay, you guys hear that? What's going on? Have context? That's from a primary source that they're translating. It's talking about there's 100 families of Portuguese Jews, right? These are black folks, right? We just saw how they were described, who settled in Senegal, who came from Flanders. They didn't even come from Spain or Portugal. They had already been living in Flanders and Amsterdam and all that. And then they got kicked out of there and they had to come settle either in the Americas and other parts of Europe or West Africa. This is what's going on, guys. So a portion of them went to West Africa. They brought their, what? Law of Moses, the whole ritual thing, right? So when you see Judah on a map in West Africa, that doesn't mean that was there since ancient times. Those maps are from 1600s, 1700s. That's when they settled there. And they were openly happy to say, yeah, we're Jews and we're open, practicing our faith openly without hiding from the Catholics anymore. Okay? They are the cartographers. They are the map makers. They're the seafarers. They're the merchants and the trade, everything. The Sephardic Jews and Moors as they settle in these parts of Africa, right? Now it says here, this astonishing description dating from 1607 or 1608 is the first credible reference to an active Jewish community, all right, from the 1600s. It's not older than that, guys. In Porto on the Petite Côte. It was written by Sebastian Fernandez Casau, or Cacao, but Casau with the C, the French way. Himself a new Christian. So he was a Sephardic Jew. He was a crypto Jew because he was hiding. He's a new Christian now. They had converted, remember, by force, who had lived in Cachu and Rio Grande and had intimate first-hand knowledge of the Senegambia coast. The passage is part of his Relación, written in Castilian, all right? De todo el distrito de Guinea y gobierno de Cabo Verde. So we're going to talk about Cape Verde. Shout out to my Cape Verdean followers and listeners and my people I grew up with. You guys know your history now, and I'm happy for that. And you know, so this is they're gonna mention that a lot because a lot of these people, Sephardic Jews with Indians, ended up in Cape Verde, right? So it says, previously the best known source about the presence of Jews in Porto de Ayal was a letter from Padre Baltasar Barreira, superior of the Jesuit mission in Cabo Verde, to a priest in Rome, although the original letter dates to August 1606. The reference to Jewish settlers only appears in a subsequent redaction, later than October 1608, and many not have been written by him. There, one can read. Next comes Porto de Ayal, in which there is a village of 100 Portuguese who follow the law of Moses, and the king protects them from whomever wants to impede them. This port is the most important for foreign commerce, all right? Very important detail that I left out. As I said in the beginning, not only were they allowed or able to settle in these parts of West Africa, but they were protected by the local kings. Protected from whom? From the Catholics, from coming and grabbing them. The Catholics, they were fleeing the Inquisition, remember. They don't want Jews and Moors to exist anymore. The Catholics are trying to take over the world powers, right? Religion and everything, the state. Make it the world, one world religion. And so they didn't let nobody impede on them, right? Meaning he allowed them to be who they were. He allowed them to settle. He allowed them to build. The kings of these African nations allowed them to settle in their land, build their synagogues, be Jews again, practice their culture, everything openly. And the most important thing, guys, assimilate. Assimilate, just like the Huguenots did, just like the Moors did, just like the Sephardic Jews in Europe, just like they did in the Americas with the American Indians. That's why it's in your blood. Just like they're doing in West Africa. They're assimilating with the local people, becoming part of Africa, right? So it says, in fact, this passage is probably derived from information given by Sebastián Fernández Casao, possibly from the same Relación, but inaccurately simplified. At that time, frequent contact linked Cachu to both Porto de El and the nearby coastal trading center of Joal, or Joala. In the first quote from Casao himself, the people from Flanders, all right, very important. The people, they came from Flanders, but these are black Portuguese Jews, right? As later records were made clear, were in fact Portuguese new Christian immigrants. They weren't Flanders people. They were actual Portuguese who had settled there. Remember, they had settled all over Europe. We got the whole history and the breakdown in numerous videos already, where the Sephardic Jews ended up and who they became before they came to the Americas, right? How many different countries they were living in. They were in charge and controlling. So they had settled in. So Flanders was one of those places. So you might get a Flemish or Flanders person, you know, this Amsterdam kingdom or it's the Spanish Holland kingdom at the time, I think. So it says people from Flanders, they were actually Portuguese new Christian immigrants who had settled in Amsterdam and Rotterdam. They had settled in the New Jerusalem. Amsterdam became their hub, their haven. They became the Dutch. These so-called black folks, right, from Spain and Portugal, Sephardic Jews, Moors, they became your elite. In Amsterdam, they became your merchants. They became the owners of the West India Company, East India Company. Yeah, they just ship owners, they were running the whole commerce, the trade in the world. So after that, some of them had gone to Amsterdam and Rotterdam, so-called Flanders people, now Flanders, right? They returned, or they feared the Inquisition, right? It says they're freed from the threat of Inquisition. So in Amsterdam, right, they had returned to their Jewish faith. That's where they became New Jerusalem. They were, again, openly Jews. The term Flanders is used in Portuguese sources to refer not only to the Spanish Netherlands, that's what I meant, the Spanish Holland Kingdom, Spanish Netherlands, an example like in Antwerp, but also to the United Provinces, including Amsterdam. This usage, which is common in the literature of until the Peace of Westphalia in 1648, expresses Spanish and Portuguese political designs on the Netherlands and the refusal to accept de facto independence. Before Casao's account, evidence for the presence of Sephardic Jews on the Petite Côte is diffuse. The only information we have is about Joal. At the end of 1591, a representative of De Antonio Prior do Creto, the defeated Portuguese rival of Philip II for the throne of Portugal, found Jews among the audience of Portuguese who had gathered to hear news about De Antonio. Inquisition records from 1612 paint a more detailed picture of the Senegalese Jewish communities, which had by then become firmly implanted under the protection of local rulers. The available sources confirm that the political protection to the Jews extended eventually from Porto de El to Joal. Okay, so what they're trying to say there, that there, after the Inquisition, there is some accounts of Sephardic Jews, you know, settling in these parts of Senegal, right? Clearly, most of the Portuguese inhabitants of Porto de El were of Jewish origin. Clearly, okay? So when you're reading these accounts of the Portuguese went to West, like we always think white folks, we always think white Christians, we always think we got the wrong concept. They brainwashed us. They whitewashed the history, guys. This is what I'm trying to break you out of. This is what I'm trying to help you with. Understand. So clearly most of the Portuguese inhabitants of Porto de Ale were of Jewish origin. And who were the Portuguese Jews? How were they described? Is a general consensus. All these sources are telling us they were black folks, swarthy, very dark complexion, not just dark, very dark complexion, compared to Negroes, as dark as the Portuguese, as dark as the Spaniard. Literally, they use that as a reference, right? Okay, clearly, most of the Portuguese inhabitants of Porto de El were of Jewish origin. Clearly, There's a heritage there that's being forgotten. It was not a coincidence that these Portuguese Dutch Jews chose to settle there. It's not a coincidence, for they were among friends, relatives, and core religionists. In fact, according to the journal of Peter van den Broek, before 1609, there was a community of 30 Portuguese and mestizos. Mestizos, huh? I thought that was an American thing. Portuguese and mestizos, huh? In Porto Dial. In the course of the next few years, the Portuguese who had settled along the Petite Côte publicly affirmed their Jewish identity. In some cases, the process of Judaization occurred locally, but in other instances, the Portuguese traveled from Senegal to the Low Countries, where they established their Jewish identity by undergoing circumcision and basic religious instruction before returning to the Petite Côte. Okay? Man, get out of my channel. I'm joking. I'm reading primary sources, but I'm joking. Okay. Guess what? The joke's on you for saying such a dumb thing, man. Anyways, the main source of information about new Christians and reconverts who established the first communities of public Jews at Joal and Porto de El is a file compiled to the Vicar of São Domingos in 1612, Bartolomeu Rebelo Tavares. In cashew his seat, he ordered an inquiry and listened to numerous witnesses about the recent events and about the individuals who were said to be Jews. The information was forwarded to the Lisbon Inquisition, but did not lead to the arrest of the Jews of the Petite Côte. They were trying to snitch on them. Somebody's trying to snitch on them, man. We got some Sephardis over here, man. Come get them, Catholics. The corpus of Portuguese manuscripts also includes denunciations to a visitor of the Bishop of Cape Verde, a parallel inquiry led by the civil judicial authorities, personal memorials and statements wherein both clergymen and laymen, as well as independent denunciations to the Inquisition in Lisbon and testimony from witnesses called by the tribunal. These documents are completed by records from the Dutch notarial archives, which add names of Portuguese immigrants who traded between Senegal and Amsterdam. The Portuguese and Dutch archives may be readily cross-checked, thereby mutually confirming the accuracy of the information they contain. Together, they provide a relatively complete, but almost certainly not comprehensive list of the public Jews, those individuals who openly asserted their religious identity on the Petite Côte. The public Judaism described by numerous witnesses lead us to consider the credibility of their statements, which are striking contrast to the usual general accusations about new Christians in Portuguese documents of the time. All right. Our research has enabled us to identify by name 8 adult men who resided in or traded primarily out of Joal, as well as 9 others who were primarily based in Porto de El. There was regular movement back and forth between 2 communities. In addition, there are 2 unnamed boys, the younger sons of the rabbi Jacob Peregrino, as well as further 14 named adult men who were part of these Petite Côte communities, but who are not specifically identified with one or the other of the 2 villages. This information is provided in Appendix 1. Yeah, so we're gonna go into that, right? They're telling us that they got some examples, right? Now remember, that doesn't mean that's the only people. There's a whole bunch of that first source was in that one place, 100 families. In that one place, 100 families. Let's go to Google Maps real quick, right? Since we're live here, right? You guys don't mind. Oh, the holy city of Wichitas. We'll get to that. So, Senegal, right? Why is this important, right? So, Black Europeans. Now we go Goree Island. You guys know I got a Goree Island. All right, Goree Island, Kurimeo video, right? Goree Island. So this is it right here. 7 months ago. So Goree Island, the myth of Goree Island, Senegal. It was never a slave port. There's actually a mansion, and I bet you it was a mansion because they said the guy was a merchant. So these merchants, I bet you this mansion of Goree Island was actually a Sephardic Jew. Remember, we're talking about the coast of Senegal. Goree Island is in Senegal, Dakar. Okay? So if you go watch my myth of Goree Island, right? So we got the car right here, Goree Island and all that. So we got some, and then 400 miles to the west, 400 miles, that's a lot. You got Cape Verde. And there's a whole history here we went over with American Indians and the Sephardic Jews and everything. So it's all making sense, right? We know that Goree Island was not a slave port. It was a mansion, all right? That door of no return was an actual trash chute. It was an actual trash chute. Go watch the video. Don't be in your feelings, all right? We ain't making nothing up here. It's all research. You can verify, all right? It's all research we can verify. So just to have reference, right? Senegal, this is where we're talking about, West Africa, right? They're right here. And we're gonna get into all these other countries too. They went everywhere. We got a whole book we're going over, right? So Cape Verde, Senegal, you see the connection, right? So it went the other way around, right? It went the other way around, into Africa, not out of Africa, into, okay? Continuing in the book, Forgotten Diaspora, the Jewish communities, again, in West Africa by Peter Mark José de Silva Horta, okay? So fair use. It says in August of 1612, information was sent to the Portuguese trading post at Cachao to the vicar of the Rio de São Domingos that new Christians from Flanders were arriving at the Petite Côte on Dutch ships, all right? These are your so-called Dutch. They're black Dutch, now they're Dutch. But these are actually Portuguese Jews. The men of this second wave had taken Jewish names, and they openly practiced Jewish rituals. Significantly, as the term New Christians indicates, these individuals were originally from Portugal. The report asserts some men of the nation of New Christians came from the states of Flanders to the coast of Guinea in Flemish ships, and they haven't behaved like Christians in this kingdom of Portugal, and its overseas territories have apostatized, some of them taking Jewish names, and all of them performing ceremonies and rituals of the law of Moses. So they're a little confused. They're like, man, they're Christians, but they're doing Jewish things. That's because they had been forced to convert to Christianity. They were conversos. These were moriscos and marranos, right? Crypto Jews, crypto Muslims. They had been forced to be Christians, but underneath they were still so-called Jews or so-called Muslims, and they still practice their faith in secret. That's where the crypto comes in, right? So now they're in Africa, they don't have to hide anymore. Now they're going back to the law of Moses with their so-called Jewish names. This information, along with similar denunciations 6 months earlier, had to be brought to Cachao by witnesses from Joal and Porto de El, because there was no official representative of the Tribunal do Santo Oficio, Inquisition, on the Petite Côte, nor was there in Cachao. But there the vicar could, as a delegate of the Bishop of the Cape Verde Islands, undertake investigations that might eventually lead to prison and shipment of the accused to Lisbon Inquisition. Nevertheless, the absence of a regular tribunal was surely a factor attracting Judaism, New Christians to this region, as in other parts of Africa. The same sources an anonymous unpublished account of foreign trade from the Senegal River to the southern coast, also written in 1612, complained not only that men from Flanders were living publicly under Jewish law, all right? You got black folk coming from Flanders who were Portuguese Jews living in Senegal, practicing their Jewish law publicly. And it says in their tongue, viviendo na lei judaica, fazendo todas as cerimônias de la publicamente na dita costa. That's Portuguese. But also that other Christians were sailing from Portugal to Port of Cachao or the Rio Grande. These new arrivals then traveled to Porto de El by way of Flanders. According to the anonymous Memoria from 1612, right? This is all from primary sources. Some of the new arrivals from Portugal would travel first to Cachao, from there to Porto de El, and then on to Flanders, quite clearly in order to join the Portuguese Jewish community before returning to the Petite Côte. The situation of two brothers, Felipe de Souza and Diogo Vaz de Souza, is a case in point. Both men, who were originally from Lisbon, settled in Guinea at the Portuguese slave trading post of Saint Domingos in what is now northwestern Guinea-Bissau. You see? Also there, you see? Who's going there? It's not white Europeans. They then traveled to Amsterdam, where they became Jews. We might say where they officially converted or reconverted to Judaism, all right? They went back to their practice. They went back to being who they were. They didn't have to hide anymore, guys. Felipe and Diogo then returned to Senegambia, emmoñado como otros mais portugueses, más judeus, and a square-rigged ship, the carrack, with many other Portuguese, but all Jews. With many other Portuguese, but all Jews. What do we know about the Portuguese Jews at that time? Swarthy, very dark. We got the sources, right? Put it all together, man. We're not making any of this up. Open your mind. Stop being childish. Let go. And if you accept this, then good for you, man. You know, real historical methodology. You follow truth over emotions. So, all of these Portuguese, all Jews, to settle definitively on the Petite Côte. In the Memoria, both Felipe and Diogo are said to have made the above-mentioned circuit, the former passing by Cacho and the later by Rio Grande. The genesis of this movement is not clear. It appears to have been inspired by contact with Portuguese Jews who came to the Petite Côte with the first ships from the United Provinces, but it may have begun with a local Sephardic network. Yeah, they had already established, they had poor Jews everywhere that maintained contact along the upper Guinea coast, all right, all over the so-called Guinea coast, including Cape Verde, right? It is highly probable that the arrival of these Jews at the Petite Côte was inspired by contact with earlier settlers, Portuguese New Christians who had settled on the Senegalese coast as lançados during the 16th century, all right, the 1500s. Sephardic Jews were already settling there. This is what they're telling you. So by the 1600s, when they brought these waves, these ships coming in, it's because their people were already there, had set up shop for them and prepared the way for them. One settler, Luis Fernandez Duarte, alias Joshua Israel, had learned from his brother Manuel de Fonseca and from Diogo Núñez de Fonseca, maybe also a close relative, about their own business connections with de Sebastião, the papal king of Busis. In a letter to the king, Luis asserted that his relatives considered themselves brothers of Sebastião, hence a kind of inheritance of client based in family links facilitated trade for new arrivals, okay? They hooked each other up. That's what they did in the Americas. That's how they settled the Americas. They was first Sephardic Jews who colonized the Americas and helped everybody else come. Or same thing, guys. They're doing it in West Africa. Same thing we've talked about before. The commercial success of these earlier traders, some of whom subsequently returned to Portugal, and the fact that on the Petite Côte, they were not bothered by agents of the Inquisition, the Catholics weren't bothering them there, surely played a role in the decision of Portuguese immigrants to Amsterdam in the early 17th century to travel to Joal and Porto right, to travel to West Africa, Senegal. The Petite Côte was a part of Senegambia, about which they had up-to-date information and where they could safely practice the Jewish religion. All right? Imagine the incentives they had. They had big incentive to go over there. So many of them went over there. So who are a lot of these so-called West Africans? That's what I'm trying to explain to you. By the early 1600s, the arrival of Portuguese New Christians in the port cities of Northern Europe and their return to their ancestral religion led to the growth of significant Sephardic communities in Amsterdam, Hamburg, and to the lesser degree Rotterdam. All right, we've gone over this history a lot, literally a lot, like thousands, hundreds of thousands of them. These became your Dutch, so-called Germans, Prussians, French, Huguenots, Protestants, Quakers, Pilgrims. Hello, you guys remember? We're talking about the same people. Most of the earliest members of Amsterdam's newly founded Sephardic community had come from Portugal, okay? And so how are the Sephardic Jews of Portugal described? How are the Portuguese Jews described? As very dark, so swarthy, black, as Negroes, okay? We're not black watching. We're not trying to take anybody else's identity. We're correcting history. We're correcting the whitewash history, the false narratives, the generalizations, the false generalizations. Are you guys hearing me? Can I get it? Yeah. Confirmation, or you just listen to me so much that nobody's chatting? That's what's up. Anyways, they came from Portugal. Okay, we know what Portuguese Jews look like and how they're written in primary sources. All these so-called Dutch, German, French, Jews. And they maintain close commercial connections to their family members back in Lisbon. This contact often passed through Antwerp, which remained part of the Spanish possessions after the northern provinces of the Netherlands had established their effective independence by 1608 or 1609. The Dutch Jews were outfitting trading vessels that sailed to the Petite Côte on an annual basis. These voyages were financed largely by Sephardic merchants. Okay, these voyages were what? Financed largely by Sephardic merchants, just like almost every business venture that colonized the Americas. So when we're talking about the Virginia Company, the Massachusetts Company, the Summer Isles Company, the Providence Company. This is what I'm trying to tell you. And Columbus. Who funded Columbus? We got a whole video on this. I forget his name. It was a Sephardic Jew. He's actually, instead of writing his very first letter to Europe, Columbus, he wrote it to his financier, the Sephardic Jew. I forget his name, but I got the videos on it. Not to the king and queen. Thanking him, right? He got financed. This is your merchants, guys. These are your ship owners. It's not the evil so-called white man. So when you see all these shorts on the internet talking about the Jews were the slave owners, and there's a lot of context missing, guys. Stop sharing those shorts with me. Stop sharing that nonsense with me on Instagram and everywhere else. I don't want to see AI shorts and people talking without showing sources, missing a whole bunch of context. This contact often passed through Antwerp again. So by 1609, these Dutch Jews, right? So-called Black Dutch, so-called Dutch, right? West India Company, East India Company. The Dutch came to Brazil. Yeah, these Dutch. The Dutch Jews were outfitting trading vessels that sailed to the Petite Côte on an annual basis, man. It was normal, back and forth. These voyages were financed largely by Sephardic merchants. Again, the ships traded at the ports at Porto, Joal, and Joal. By 1611, some of these vessels also called at a third trading community where there were Sephardic traders, Recife, later known as Rio Fresco, and eventually as Rufisque, located further north along the Petite Côte. Okay? They brought Indians to this place. I know that, Recife, and now I know exactly where they brought them. You see that? Guys, we've read of Indians being taken from South America and brought to Recife. Like literally, I've read that. That's literally in West Africa. They brought Indians to West Africa. Now I know exactly where they brought them to. You see what I'm saying? For new Christian merchants who remained in Portugal during the first 2 decades of the 17th century, an important avenue of direct contact to Guinea of Cape Verde, they call Cape Verde the Guinea coast. When they're a lot of the time, when they're saying they grab Negroes from the Guinea coast, they meant Cape Verde. They didn't even go to mainland Africa. The Azores, the Canary Islands, that's what they were talking about, Guinea coast. A lot of the time, Saint Thomas Islands, all that. So, important avenue of direct contact to Guinea of Cape Verde consisted of the naus de registro. These were the ships of the contratador Joao Soeiro, to whom the king had rented the Contrato de Cabo Verde, or the contract of Cabo Verde, The royal contract gave Soeiro monopoly privileges for the Guinea trade. Yeah, the Guinea trade, And we know the truth now. You know that was basically mostly Indians and undesirable Europeans. The royal contact gave Soeiro monopoly privileges for the Guinea trade. Soeiro was himself a new Christian. So Soeiro himself was a Portuguese Jew. Swarthy man, all right? He had the contract of the Guinea, the privileges of monopoly of the Guinea trade, all right? We got a so-called black man. All right, get over it. Take a deep breath. It's just history. It's just history. Everybody was melanated. See, you gave Pale's King too much history. That's the problem. You allowed them to put themselves into history so far back, and you believed it because you wanted somebody to blame. You wanted to blame a color and not the persons. As Inquisition sources make abundantly clear, he facilitated the safe passage to Senegal of other new Christian merchants. Now he made it easy for all his boys to come, all the cryptos. Soweto almost certainly had family ties to Amsterdam. Some of the Dutch Jews were collaborating with him. For men like Felipe and Diego Vaz de Souza, who grew up as Christians and possibly as secret Jews, in Lisbon nearly a century after the forced conversion of Portuguese Jews to Christianity, I told you it was forced, conversion led them publicly to assert their Jewish identity. The Vicar of São Domingos writes, Diego also had himself made Jewish in Flanders. He didn't become Jewish in Flanders. He went back to his Jewish faith. He didn't have to hide anymore, right, in Amsterdam. Gaspar Carneiro, groom of the king's chamber, mozo de Cámara de El Rey, testified to him that these two men had been Christians when they were at the river of Cachao, and they converted and lived there openly on the Petite Côte as Jews. In the Inquisition archives, both Felipe and Diego Vaz de Souza emerged as individual personalities. Felipe de Souza had distinctively physiognomy. He is described as muito pequeño el alcorcovado, very small of stature with a hunched back. He appeared in the historical record by his nickname of Corcovado. They call him the hunchback. Damn. We're talking about black folks over here, guys. He appears in his brother Diogo was designated Omoco, or Mozo, the younger, to distinguish him from another Diego Vaz de Souza. The older Diego, known not surprisingly as Oveño, or the elder, the Bello, or like old, right, later played an important role in the religious life of the Joal Jews. His house became the location of the synagogue. All right, see the history. Church authorities were never able to impose their jurisdiction over the Petite Côte, and the 1612 investigation did not lead to any trials. The survival of the Jewish communities was never effectively challenged. The Jesuit father, Sebastian Gomes, wrote from Santiago in the Cape Verde Islands, all right? The Catholics who were in Cape Verde, they're trying to hate. They're trying to capture the Jews there in Senegal, right? Because they're trying to control the Jews in Cape Verde. So it says, because in several parts, he says, right, in several parts on the mainland Guinea, particularly the one which is called the coast, example, the coast of Porto and Joal, there are many Portuguese who declare themselves as Jews. And because several heretics of different sects come to this place, with whom one could have continuous disputes on matters of faith. An anonymous author replied that the fourth reason required more action and fire from the Inquisition than the doctrine of the gospel spread by unarmed and poor preachers. For the Jewish merchants who settled on the Petite Côte, the resulting situation was highly desirable. Unlike the new Christians and Marranos, forcibly converted Jews who continued secretly to practice Judaism in Brazil and New Spain, literally New Spain, you guys, you understand? Brazil, that's the whole of South America. That's the Portuguese part of South America. New Spain is the other part of South America, and all of Central America, including parts of Western or Southwestern U.S., Florida, Southeast U.S. That's all of that is New Spain. So on all that land, people have to be secret Jews. They have to be Christians. This is why when we read in history, we have to uncover these crypto Jews in American history. But in Africa, they didn't have to hide. It's easy to find them, is what they're telling you. It's easier to find here. They were secretly practicing Judaism in Brazil and New Spain, in the American colonies, right? Studied by NATO Watchtel, almost none and perhaps not a single one of the Jews of Joal and Porto became victims of the Inquisition. Not a single one. Not a single one got hanged or killed or got captured by the Inquisition in West Africa. Listen. That's why you see that map of Judah there, because they were openly professing their faith, the Sephardic Jews who had settled there, not because they were there from ancient times. Pay attention. They are the cartographers. They are the merchants. It says, even 20 years later, the religious situation on the Petite Côte does not seem to have undergone significant change. Even 20 years later, emigration to the United Provinces, followed by the establishment of a Portuguese Jewish community in Amsterdam, played a central role in the evolution of individuals from new Christians to public Jews. The religious education and circumcision of the first Portuguese men to settle as Jews on the Petite Côte took place in Amsterdam. All right, again, black folks. There, many of them also took Hebrew names. They didn't take Hebrew names, they went back to their names. In their depositions, church informants took pains to give both the converts old Portuguese names and their new names. For example, Abraham Toro, Pedro Rodriguez Veiga. You see that? But that was his real name. Among the numerous residents of the Petite Côte who are described in the Inquisition sources as having traveled to Guinea, from Guinea to Holland, right, from West Africa to Holland in order to become Jewish, were Pedro Rodriguez Veiga and his brother Gaspar Fernandez, both of whom publicly asserted their Jewishness. Likewise, Diego Martins Bondia, or Bondia of Lisbon, who became a factor, chief trader, at San Domingos, subsequently moved to the Petite Côte, and from there traveled to the Netherlands. By the third decade of the 17th century, all three of these men had become established members of the Amsterdam merchant community. Their later lives followed a long spiritual journey, yet the physical journey was not so long compared with the travels of other merchants to India or Brazil. From Lisbon to the coast of Guinea, they would have needed only 2 weeks. It's not even that far. It's not like going to the Americas, guys. So it's even easier to get there. More incentive for them to go there, right? Sephardic Jews to go into West Africa, more incentive. Their travels were in many respects typical of the first generation of new Christians who became Jews in Amsterdam. At the dawn of the 17th century, extensive and frequent travel was an integral part of their young adult lives. Some of the Jewish residents of Porto and Joal retained their Portuguese names to use when they were outside of the Jewish community. This would have been consistent with the practice within Europe, especially among Portuguese new Christians, amongst the crypto Jews, the Swarty Portuguese. Remember, we got that right in the beginning. So when we're reading this chapter, we have context. Not picturing no pale-skinned people, blonde, blue-eyed. No, we're talking about Swarty people, so-called black folks, right? Crayon color, yeah, but we're talking about dark complexion people they will call Negroes. So among Portuguese new Christians, right, that's what they were doing, who used their Christian name while they were in Portugal, right? They had identities and their Jewish name or names only went outside the realm of the Inquisition. All right. That's why they call crypto Jews, right? There's a whitewashing. See? It says the subsequent lives of these men and of other Portuguese new Christians who moved to the United Provinces at the beginning of the 17th century are documented both in Dutch notarial records and in the records of Amsterdam's 3 Sephardic congregations, Bet Jacob, Neves Shalom, and Bet Israel. Okay? Now, guys, listen. Remember what we read earlier in the beginning of this video. What did the guy see in the Amsterdam synagogue? What did he see? It was one of these. It was literally one of these synagogues right here. It was one of these synagogues. He said that everybody in there was black. That all these Jews in this Amsterdam synagogue were black. So-called black. So anyways, they had connections to these same synagogues in Amsterdam. If you didn't see it, go to the beginning of this video so you can see it again. It says records of the commercial activities of several members of the Sephardic community in Amsterdam are preserved in the notarial archives that are now part of the city's Gemeente Archive. Many of the traders who settled on the Petite Côte around 1612 also appear in the Dutch archives. These documents record trading voyages and other commercial transactions wills and testaments, and legal disputes. The Amsterdam notarial archives frequently provide both the individuals' Portuguese names and the names they took, either Dutch or Hebrew. Listen to that. That'll be good record to take a look at, you see, when they settle in that city. So picture what they're saying here, guys. People had different identities. They had a Christian name and they had their original, whatever, so-called Jewish or Hebrew name. Now, remember what we read about in the book, Jews and Muslims and British colonial America, all these Francis Drake, Walter Raleigh. Remember how he was saying they probably Sephardic Jews. Those were probably their Christian names. Like put all the research together. Remember, they helped their people, all these pirates, all these merchants, these spies. The Amsterdam notarial archives frequently provide both the individual's name, right? So when they settle in that city, the Dutch or the Hebrew. Together, these records and the archives of the Jewish cemetery at Ouderkerk, established in 1614, about 10 kilometers from Amsterdam along the Amstel, demonstrate the existence of a fixed Jewish identity among those Petite Côte traders who later settled in Amsterdam. In West Africa, when they traveled away from the Petite Côte, the Portuguese Jews, right, Swarty, tended to be more circumspect about their religious identity. When trading with Portuguese Cristãos, Velhos, or Old Christians, meaning original Christians, people who hadn't converted, not like new Christians who are the cryptos. You get it? They called them old Christians or original Christians. They were scared to trade. They were careful to not tell people they were Jews if they were dealing with the original Christians, the people who were already Catholics before the conversion was forced, right? So when trading with Portuguese Cristão Velhos or old Christians, they were more likely to use their Portuguese names, right? Their Christian names. Some of them also used their Portuguese names and the Christian identity that was implicitly associated with those names. When dealing with local African traders who were themselves Christians, in this respect, the Jews of the Petite Côte were no different from other 16th and 17th century Portuguese and Euro-African traders. They're saying black Europeans, literally, Euro-African. So I bet you a lot of those are just being called African because of their color. Just like saying Afro-Colombian just because he's so-called black Colombian. And there's no proof of that person being from Africa or being descendant from Africans. Yeah. Even though some of them are Euro-African, North African mixing, you know. So these intermediaries in the trade between Africans and Europeans also served as cultural brokers or middlemen. In terms of identity, the Jews of the Petite Côte were Jews and Portuguese, just as the Cristãos Velhos or the Old Christians. And also many Cristãos Novos or New Christians were Portuguese and Christians. In a similar manner, many of the Africans were culturally assimilated into the predominantly Christian Luso-African culture and communities of the Cape Verde Islands and the mainland. Okay, so Portugal and Africa, right? So mainland. So Luso-African, that's another term we got to be careful with. So there is literally such a term as Luso-African because there were so many black Lusitanians that they called them Luso-Africans. Now, does that mean that they were mixed with Africans? Not always. Does that mean that they descended from? Not always. They just a lot of the time calling them Luso-Africans because they knew they were so-called black people. People that were literally called Negroes or black today. So they will give them that African thing on it. I'm not saying all of them aren't or that some of them weren't mixed with African, but a lot of the time they're just using that word like black guys, like black Lusitani or Luso black. So culture and communities of Cape Verde, just like in Cape Verde. They emphasized their Christian identity when among European merchants in the Cape Verde Islands, but assumed a Muslim African identity when they were living in African communities on the mainland. You see, I see that? Huh? Chameleons, adapting, assimilating, amalgamating. There is, however, one difference regarding the, well, okay, wait, hold up. That's big. So how would they be able to blend in if they're being both European and Africans playing both roles, right? If Europeans are supposed to be white, Africans are supposed to be black, right? So just think about that. There is, however, one difference regarding the evolving identity of the Petite Côte Jews. There's a common element in all Inquisition denunciations and reports. Most Jews, as soon as they felt safe, seem to have taken pride in stating their Jewishness in a public way. Even near Christians, this attitude is to be distinguished from the concomitant situation of contextually determined dual or multiple identities. A central question that we will consider in the following chapters is this: to what extent did Portuguese Jewish merchants in Guinea of Cape Verde, listen, in Cape Verde, they're calling it Guinea. That's what I'm trying to tell you. They call Cape Verde Guinea. So in Guinea of Cape Verde, or yes, Cape Verde. So to what extent did Portuguese Jewish merchants in Cape Verde adopt the characteristic Senegambian identity model for traveling merchants, a model of flexible and contextually contingent multiple identities, meaning they were openly Jews in Cape Verde a lot of the time too. To what extent were these Sephardim, right? Sephardim people, Sephardic, Sephardim, right? Sephardim, simply following the pragmatic and even necessary model that had been effectively imposed upon Iberian New Christians who wished to maintain ties to their ancestral religion in the face of the Inquisition? And to what extent does the appearance along the Petite Côte of communities whose members publicly asserted their Jewishness represent the early establishment of a fixed or permanent Jewish identity among individuals who, for 100 years, had been forced either to accept the fact of a dual identity or to dissimulate and hide behind a public facade of being Christian? The Amsterdam Jewish community and the Jews of the Petite Côte, okay? And we continue. Hope you guys enjoying the reading. Welcome. Thank you for tuning in. Shout out to everybody in the live chat. It says the Portuguese Sephardic community in the Netherlands. All right, we're talking about Swarthy people. We're talking about black folks in the Netherlands played a key role. This is black, so-called black history that you always leave out in your black studies and Pan-Africanism because you thought these were white folks. But they played a key role, these black folks, these Portuguese Sephardic Jews, both in individuals' religious development and in the establishment of Porto, Joal, and Joal as independent Jewish communities, right, in West Africa and Senegal. José Alberto Tavim suggests that one should be careful in asserting the crucial support of an incipient community. He argues that the overseas communities, in fact, offer social and economic support to Amsterdam. We argue to the contrary that the religious support proffered by the nascent Sephardic community in Amsterdam clearly played a crucial role in the early 17th century development of the Petite Côte communities. On a social and economic level, the role of Amsterdam was also crucial to trade in Joal and Porto Joal. But Tavim is correct to emphasize the reciprocal effect of the Petite Côte, strengthening the economic viability of the Amsterdam Portuguese community. One may speculate that Rufusque played a similar role. That's another part in Africa, right there. The history of the Portuguese, in parentheses, right, these Swarthy Sephardic Jews community in Amsterdam had been extensively studied elsewhere. I mean, we studied that a lot. We got a lot of videos on that. The origins of this community date to about 1595 when Antwerp, home to an earlier community of Spanish Marranos, all right, Marranos, Moors, Marranos, and Portuguese New Christians, was subjected to a Dutch maritime blockade and could no longer serve as the center for commerce with Portugal, right? So they had set up shop in Antwerp first, guys. This is what they're letting us know. This is what we have gone over before. We know that the whole trajectory, the whole migration, everywhere they went, we got this too. And then from there, because they got this blockade put on them, they made another center of commerce, which was in Amsterdam. They had moved to Amsterdam. So it says during the first decade of the 17th century, the 1600s, right, the temporary easing of Portuguese restrictions on new Christian immigration, right, on the crypto Jews, led hundreds of crypto Jews, including those sometimes referred to as crypto Jews, like I was just saying, who had secretly continued to observe Jewish rituals to leave for Amsterdam. The ensuing 12 years truce between Spain and the Netherlands from 1609 to 1621 also facilitated emigration from Portugal, often via Antwerp to Amsterdam, all right? Again, all this, all black folks, guys. Now they're black, now they're Antwerp people, now they're German, now they're Holland, now they're Dutch, now they're in Amsterdam. But they're running all the commerce, they're setting up shop everywhere. The truce also facilitated the circulation of Sephardic traders toward the Atlantic Basin. This political conjuncture helps to explain the diasporic wave to which the Senegambian communities belong. All right, a diaspora has nothing to do with West Africans going to America. There's many diasporas, and the Sephardic Jews and Moors, one based on the Inquisition, is a big one we leave out. The nascent Portuguese community in Amsterdam rapidly established an extensive trade network with the Portuguese overseas commercial empire. This network was based largely on family ties, poor Jews, and bank Jews. Oh, I forget the codes, but the poor Jews or the court Jews, right? These are all families. That's how they did it. They kept it in the family, guys. They controlled all the trade and ports in the world. The shipping, they were the merchants. That's why I say always, who's the merchants? When you see that title in colonial times, there must be some Sephardic Jewish relation there by blood or association to Sephardic Jew networks. And that's why that person is a merchant. So again, this network was based largely on family ties. In Amsterdam, the synagogue, begun in 1612, but only completed in 1639, came to symbolize the wealth and significance of the most important Jewish community in Western Europe in the 17th century. And again, we're not talking about the Chazars, we're not talking about Ashkenazi Jews. We're talking about Sephardic, Portuguese, Spanish Jews, Swarti, so-called black folks. Yeah, the most important Jewish community in Western Europe, guys, by black folks. An important step in the evolution of the Jewish settlements in Senegal occurred in 1612. Early in that year, Diogo Vaz de Souza, or Velho, was said to have received a letter from a Jewish citizen of Amsterdam informing him of the imminent arrival in Joal of one Jacob Peregrino. Peregrino, a Portuguese-born Jew, all right? So we know he was Swarti, so-called black, right? Learned in Torah, was being sent to Joal to offer religious instruction and spiritual leadership to the new Christians of Guinea, to the crypto Jews of Guinea. All right? Well, they need a leader, man. They need a rabbi. Basically, they sent a rabbi over to them in Guinea, right? Remember, Guinea includes Cape Verde. He was also bringing sacred scripture in order to end the spiritual blindness under which they had suffered, because they had to be Christians, right? They had left their ways. Jacob Peregrino, whose Portuguese name was Jerónimo Rodrigues Freire. You guys hear that? They had different identities. Also used another name, Diogo Rodrigues, in the United Provinces. Jacob may have used the two Christian names in Guinea, as a report by Dutch traders quoted later names like him, Jacques Peregrino or Diogo. Jacob was born in the town of Tancos, where he was a farmer. According to one witness, he later became a salesman in Lisbon, working for Estevão del Cairo. Peregrino or Pellegrino is subsequently described as having fled from Portugal to Flanders. His wife also escaped, together with the people who came from Milan. Agente de Milan, that's Milan, from Italy. She died in Amsterdam. Their son Manuel Peregrino later joined his father in Africa. Two other sons, 10 and 12 years of age, are mentioned in a statement made by a group of Catholic residents in the Petite Côte. So, Diego Peregrino, or Jerónimo, or Jacob Peregrino, fled the Inquisition, fled at the Catholics. He was going to get killed. He fled with his family. He ended up in Amsterdam. That's the story of many of these Jews that ended up in Amsterdam, became very wealthy, became your West India, East India Company owners, all these merchants, right? and bankers and all that. And then they ended up in Africa. His family specifically ended up in Africa. His wife had died in Amsterdam. He went there with his kids. Says it is clear that Jacob Peregrino was the spiritual leader of the Petite Côte communities. However, his former status is less certain. He lived in Venice for 13 years, during which time he had undergone a religious education. These Venice years explain the Italianized forms his name and surname sometimes take in sources of different origin. Jacob, or Jacob, or Giacomo, Peregrino, Pellegrino, or Pellegrino, or Pellegrino, and even Pellegrim. That almost sounds like pilgrim, right? Almost sounds like pilgrim because it is. Peregrino is a pilgrim. A peregrino in Spanish is a pilgrim. And you guys see that tonic water company, Pellegrino. Now you know those are Sephardic Jews who owned that originally. You guys see? So this visit brought him sufficient prestige so that soon after his arrival in Amsterdam, he was named Parnas de la Sedaka. That is, he was one of the two individuals in charge of collection and distribution of alms within the Jewish community. This function was overseen by Joseph Pardo. Remember what Pardo means? Pardo. Remember there was a Pardo black conquistador in the America, in the colonies, in the Southeast, right? Pardo. And he went with a lot of these black, Spanish and Portuguese, and he left many of them behind. A lot of these ended up in Tennessee, where your so-called Cherokee communities ended up sprouting. What a coincidence. Anyways, I'm not saying they're all, but they got everybody. Everybody got the blood of both sides, Indians and Black Europeans, right? It's not just one person, one family, one side of it's all your lines mostly. Some have more than others. It depends on your case by case, though. No generalizations. So we got another Pardo here. Joseph Pardo, the rabbi of Bet Jacob. So you see this Pardo, he's a rabbi. So that's just telling you that the Pardos were Sephardic Jews. So these Pardos going into America, you see what they are, right? So this Pardo, Joseph Pardo, the rabbi of Bet Jacob, from 1608 and 1619, that's in Amsterdam, whether he was formally recognized as rabbi when he left for Senegal, or whether he was simply the spiritual leader of the communities is not clear from existing records. According to one Inquisition witness, when Peregrino arrived in Senegal, he was bringing with him 12 copies of Torah to teach whoever wished to become a Jew, o cual trazía 12 Biblias hebraicas para enseñar a quien concede ser judeo. Obviously, the witness was mistaken. The fact that the 12 copies were brought indicates that these were not Biblias hebraicas, the Torah, but some other unidentified religious text, most probably the prayer books described by another eyewitness as being in the hands of the participants of a ritual. The congregations on Petite Côte would likely have had only one copy each of Torah, sometime between 1620 and 1635. One of those sacred texts will very likely found its way back to Amsterdam. In addition, Peregrino was bringing ritual circumcision instruments, e assim mais os instrumentos para considerar a uso judaico. With the arrival of Jacob Peregrino, the Jews of Porto, and Joal now had a religious leader, rabbi of all the Jews who are on the coast of Guinea, who are more than 15 who publicly Judaize. Rabbi de todos os judeus que lá estão na Guinea e na costa e são mais de 15 que judaizam publicamente. Yeah. So swarte. So you see, they were saying anybody who wants to become a Jew, now they're allowing anybody, as long as they practice what they're teaching, to become a Jew. No matter if they weren't so-called Israelites or Hebrew people, right? So that's what I'm trying to tell you. You got to be careful with the whole Jewishness in West Africa, because a lot of it is just from Sephardic Jews or people converted to Judaism, just like the Ashkenazis. Because we know that the people that were locally there have a whole different history that we have gone over in my playlist, Africans Not From Africa. And one of those groups that claimed the most Jewishness actually is going back to Edom or Esau, and that's how they claim their Hebrewness. Remember, we read this from their sources. So it says, equally important, the erudite Peregrino brought his knowledge of Torah, Henceforth, it would not be necessary for Portuguese-born crypto Jews, right, to travel from Guinea to Cabo Verde or from Cape Verde to Amsterdam, right? They keep calling Cape Verde Guinea. So Cape Verde to Amsterdam. There's a large community of Cape Verdeans in Holland. Like that's one of their biggest communities, just like in the States, just like in Angola. So everywhere these Portuguese crypto Jews ended up conveniently has the biggest Cape Verdean populations in the world. So the Portuguese-born new Christians who traveled from Cape Verde to Amsterdam in order to go through the ritual circumcision and the education that would make them into publicly recognized Jews. That was probably the case of Manuel de Souza Barbosa, brother of Diogo Vaz de Souza Ovelho. According to the denunciation of Antonio de Silva Cota, he reconverted to Judaism in Joal as he took a Jewish name, Jacob Baru, at the hour of his death. Chamadoa artigo de sua morte Jacob Baru. This was also the case of Gaspar Diaz Robalo, an old man who around 1634 traveled from Cacho to Joal, which he called the Holy Land. You see? Terra Santa. You see what they're calling it now? Because they're going there. You see who's calling it the Holy Land or the land of Judah? You see who's making the maps and putting Judah on West Africa? Do you guys understand? Because a lot of the Pan-Africans using this the wrong way. You know, a lot of the Hebrew Israelite brothers are using it the wrong way with no context. Now they're calling this the Holy Land. That's a big one. That's a big one right there. I'm trying to tell you something here. From there, he went to Porto. It wasn't that before. They called it that because they had a place where they can go practice their faith openly, just like they call Amsterdam New Jerusalem. Does that mean that this part of Africa is the real Holy Land because they went there and called it the Holy Land? No, right? From there, he went to Porto where he was circumcised by Manuel Peregrino, the son of Jacob. Baby already sick, he died of his ritual injuries and had a Jewish funeral. Wow. He got circumcised, he died of that. Wow, he got an infection or something. Damn. The fact that this Rabbi Peregrino was sent by the Sephardic community in Amsterdam, right? So-called black folks, demonstrates the important role in the spiritual leadership of the Senegambian Jewish community that was exercised by the Portuguese Jews of Amsterdam. Portuguese Jews, so swarthy, like described the general consensus of that time, that these were black folks, so-called black. Under Jacob Peregrino's leadership, the Jews of the Petite Côte soon established a synagogue in or adjacent to the housing compound of Diego Vaz Ovelho. Amsterdam notarial deeds show that Peregrino's mission in Guinea was not exclusively a religious one. He came as a trader, working for other Amsterdam merchants. All right, it's all about business too, man. Come on now. Members of the social and economic elite of the Portuguese community. We know from Inquisition files that he eventually became a wealthy man in Senegambia, as he became one of the major creditors for European traders through the expedient of maintaining a monopoly of iron bars on the Petite Côte. But the fact that as a spiritual leader, he brought a dozen prayer books and ritual instruments indicates that the Amsterdam community supported Peregrino in his efforts to reconvert new Christians. The reconversion mission was successful. Among newly converted new Christians were men like Jacob Baru and Luis Fernandez Soeiro, who came from Rio Grande, both of whom became Jews in Joal. Others such as Gaspar Diaz Robalo may have come from African coast, and Luis Mendez arrived from Santiago Island to be converted in Joal. So when they say they're being converted, turning to Jews, they're going back to their faith. They're getting out of the secret. They're no longer crypto. They don't have to hide anymore. They can openly be Jews again. Complex and varied factors led the Dutch Jewish community to take on a central role in the spiritual life of their brethren on the Petite Côte. In Senegal, a core group of Portuguese new Christians already identified themselves as Jews, right? They were crypto Jews, now they're Jews. No more crypto. It is probable, although we do know with certainty, that they had a close link with the earliest known public Jews of Guinea or Cape Verde, right? These Jews were documented at Buguendo at the Rio de São Domingos in northern Guinea-Bissau in 1560. They're already there in the 1500s. There we have reports of anti-Christian behavior and of Jewish ritual practices. At the end of the 16th century, the Petite Côte was almost certainly home to a community of crypto Jews, lanzados. All right, they're going to talk about that in chapter 3. We're going to get that. The commercial connections and quite possibly family ties that these earlier settlers established with local Wolof and Sardic society would have paved the way for the establishment of the trading communities at Joal and Porto de El. Further research is needed to establish historical details about the 16th century presence of Portuguese, New Christians, crypto Jews on the Guinea coast on Cape Verde, if as seems likely, such as a community already existed before 1600, then the choice of the Petite Côte as the location to carry on trade by men such as Baz de Souza brothers, right, crypto Jews, was directly related both to commercial considerations and to their desire to return to their ancestral religion. The establishment of trading voyages between Amsterdam and this part of Senegambia at the moment when the first Portuguese Jewish community was established in the Dutch commercial center certainly provided further incentive for the arrival of Jews, right, Swarthy Jews, right, and crypto Jews on the Petite Côte. The Dutch, for their part, had a strong motive for maintaining close ties with the crypto Jews and the open Jews of the Petite Côte. They were attracted by commerce. When Corcovado and his brother Diogo Vaz de Souza or Mosso returned to Senegambia after their conversion in Amsterdam, they were accompanied by other Portuguese Jews, right, swarthy people, right, including Simon Rodrigues Pinel or Simon Rodrigues Pinel. Pinel, originally from Lisbon, had lived in England and Flanders and was coming to the Guinea coast to carry on trade. The new Christians of Cabo Verde, right, or the crypto Jews of Cabo Verde and the Portuguese Jews of the Petite Côte were traders by profession. All right, they were all in the trading business. These are your merchants. This is what I'm trying to tell you guys. They ran all the trade in colonial times by profession, okay? The Jews in particular belonged to a generation that had established an extensive international network of commercial connections based in part upon family ties. Okay, we've gone over this. So-called Port Jews. Pinel with his ties to Portugal, Amsterdam, and England, and the Rabbi Jacob Peregrino with his ties to Portugal, Amsterdam, Venice, and Milan were representative of these connections. Man, you're missing a lot of context with that question. We're not here to answer questions. We're reading a book. Catch up on all my videos on Sephardic Jews. You'll have your answers. In their testimony to the Inquisition, Portuguese Catholic informants in Guinea expressed concern founded as much on economic and administrative worries as on spiritual questions. There you go, spiritual questions. Their testimony was intended to convince Portuguese authorities to introduce measures that would effectively diminish the economic competition posed by Os de Nassau, the ones from the nation. For with their international connections, the new Jewish communities of Joal and Porto de El constituted a formidable challenge to the older Portuguese trading interests that were centered further south at São Domingos, Cacho, and Rio Grande, and on Santiago Island in the Cape Verde archipelago. The Dutch entered the Guinea trade during the 1590s. By this time, Portugal's commercial network based in the Cape Verde Islands, again, Portugal's commercial network, where is it headquartered? Where is the main? There's the center of Portugal's commercial network in Cape Verde. So when we're talking about Portuguese enslaving American Indians, which they did massively, where you think they were taking them if this is their center? Where you think a lot of these Indians ended up if this is their center? Cape Verde, the commercial network of Portugal, Cape Verde Islands, and in Cacho, right? And in parts of West Africa, they were taking American with trading communities of Portuguese and They're calling Luso Africans or just black Africans. They black Lusitanians, they're calling. At Cacho and other Riverian locations. And only the ones that mixed with the local people became Luso Africans. You definitely missed it. You're not understanding. You're missing context. I've explained that. You haven't watched all my videos. I can see it clearly in the statement. And again, I'm giving a presentation, brother. Man, we're not here answering questions, personal questions. You can reach out to me on any other platform outside of my live video. You had all these years to do it, and all these months and all these days. I answer everybody. Okay? Your question is missing context. We've broken this down. Like you're mixing a bunch of things together. You don't even know that right now. I'm just saying that respectfully. Okay? I'm gonna continue my reading. The United Provinces and other Northern European nations. So they were based in Cape Verde and other parts of West Africa, right? And all along the Senegalese coast, it had been in operation for over a century. The United Provinces and other Northern European nations were hampered by the fact that they traded in contravention of a theoretical Portuguese monopoly over the Guinea trade, a monopoly that was recognized, at any rate, by the papacy. On a practical level, this meant that any Dutch merchant vessel intercepted by Spanish or Portuguese warships would be treated as pirates and their goods confiscated. Okay, so this is where we get the whole Pirates of the Caribbean, all that stuff we've gone over with the crypto Jews as pirates and them fighting with the Spanish and Spanish ships fighting the pirates and all that, right? So for the Dutch and for other Northern European newcomers on the Senegambian coast, the Portuguese New Christians represented potential trading partners. Their familiarity with the commerce and the trading alliances they had established with local rulers were critical if the Dutch were to challenge Portugal's monopoly over the Upper Guinea trade. The Jews who settled in Amsterdam between 1595 and 1620 were, as Jonathan Israel notes, primarily what? Marranos, or crypto Jews from Portugal. How are the Portuguese described? The crypto Jews, the Portuguese Jews from Portugal described as swarthy, as very dark, as black, as Negroes. Okay? Okay? That's what we're talking about. Who settled in Amsterdam and later went to Senegal? Marranos or crypto Jews from Portugal. Not white folks. During this period, nearly all of the foreign trade carried on at Dutch Jews was with Portugal and the Portuguese colonies for settlements. Now, I just want to say something, guys. This is something very, very obvious to say. I don't feel like I have to be saying this, but I think I have to point this out to some people because they got questions, right? So humans are humans. It don't matter if they're the same people. You have somebody in your own family betray you, man. You have somebody in your own family do things differently than you. You have somebody in your own family practice things that are different than what you practice. So that happens in general. So when you're saying, how come they don't do this? How come they don't, their fellow man, this humans being humans, guys. And I answer all that and explain all those details and relationships and examples with different historical things. So, I mean, that's why that question to me just kind of doesn't make sense to me. And I'm talking about somebody put on the live chat, guys. You're not like, watch all my Sephardic Jews. Go with the info. I don't care what I don't know what you're trying to say. People are people. Some people are messed up. Some people are good. Some people betray their own people. Some people, they don't. They're loyal to their own people. It's just it, man. That's something I shouldn't have to explain to you, man. Thank you. I'm going to keep going now. I just wanted to get that out of my chest. So their familiarity with the commerce and the trading alliances they had established with local rulers, right? With the local kings, the local people. They're making the money. So they're like, yeah, come in, guys. Yeah, you bringing me wealth. The local kings are like, yeah, these guys are bringing me wealth. Yeah, allow them to be whoever they want to be. They can say they're Abraham's people. They can say whoever they want to. They can say they're a flying pink elephant. They can do whatever they want, as long as they're bringing me that money, man, and paying the tax I got on them, right? So they got the local rulers, right? They had allowed them to establish their commerce, and they were critical if the Dutch were to challenge Portugal's monopoly over the Upper Guinea trade. The Jews who settled in Amsterdam between 1595 and 1620 were, as Jonathan Israel notes, primarily Marranos or crypto Jews, okay? During this period, nearly all the foreign trade carried on by the Dutch Jews was with Portugal and the Portuguese colonies or settlements, all right? All black folks. Dutch Sephardic merchants used their family ties and contacts in West Africa to foster this commerce. The religious bonds that led some Portuguese New Christians to travel from Guinea to Amsterdam and then to return to Africa as circumcised Jews served also to facilitate economic cooperation with the Jewish community in Amsterdam. This connection between religion and commerce is articulated in the Memoria, an anonymous report of 1612 that states, item from the Rio São Domingos, which is much further down the coast than Joal, where there is a church called Our Lady of Victory, and where all ships of the registro go, and in this port, example in Cachu, there are a lot of white people and all the Nassau, and they mean white in status. They mean white in status, guys. Just like in white, free whites, a lot of that includes black folks in the States. The Nassau from the nation, let me see, where were we? I got lost. Who came from this city, Lisbon, to the above-mentioned rivers, São Domingos and Registros, legal trade, vessels which load there with blacks for the Indias. Oh, blacks for the Indias, huh? So the Guinea coast, Cape Verde, so blacks for the Indians, they are blacks. You see how this is missing context? I like to see this actual primary source. I bet you it says Negroes. For the Castilla, and there they go where the aforementioned vessels go, and they go to this coast named Jalof Coast, example, the Petite Côte, and they by way of Flanders, and then they return to the said coast. And from there also depart Jews who came from this city in the ships of the below mentioned people. The anonymous informant follows the list of the Jews. In other words, many of the so-called whites of Cachu, as well as those who transited through the trading center, the writer is clearly engaging hyperbole when he writes all the whites were new Christians, right? They were crypto Jews. They were Portuguese. That's why I'm telling you, they're not whites. They're just white in status. Once they arrived in Guinea, they took advantage of the presence of Dutch slaving vessels to hitch a ride to Amsterdam or Rotterdam. So they went to Amsterdam, not to America. So the slaving vessels are going to Amsterdam and Rotterdam. Sometimes by way of America, sometimes, okay? And does that mean that these ships actually carried people? Slaves, and if they did, who did they really carry as slaves? Who are the people identified? Are these indentured servants or real slaves, or what's going on? This is what we gotta look into. From Amsterdam, they returned to the Petite Côte, accompanied by Dutch Jews of Portuguese origin. One may assume that it was during their stay in the United Provinces that the new Christians, who had been to Cacho, men such as Diego Bas de Sousa or Mozo and his brother Felipe or Corcovado, converted to Judaism. Right? We just did a video the other day. The AI couldn't show me one primary source, one ship from the 1500s or 1600s coming directly from Africa, bringing people enslaved. Reportedly, right? Like literally from some sources like this that they're saying. Couldn't give me one. Couldn't find one. After Jacob Peregrino's arrival on the Petite Côte in 1612, however, Portuguese New Christians could formally convert to Judaism without leaving Senegambia. The conversion of these new Christians, some of whom had intimate knowledge of Portuguese commercial activity in Cacho, brought the latest information about changing demand for trading goods. It also gained additional allies for Dutch trading interests. At the same time, from the perspective of Portuguese Catholics in West Africa, not only was reconversion apostasy, it also constituted a direct threat to their economic interests. So the Catholics are not liking any of this. Again, the Catholics don't mean white either. Within a very short time of the first Dutch trading missions to Senegambia, the amount of commerce lost by Portugal through trade between Jewish coastal merchants and northern Europeans had become significant. The anonymous Portuguese account of 1612 reported that French, English, and Flemish ships were visiting all of northern Senegambia. A trader de Nassau on the Senegal River, Rodrigo Freire, born in Portimao, was one of the main agents of the trade with English ships there. He used a small commercial house to supply them with skins, ivory, and gum arabic. The anonymous report continues with a detailed description of commerce southward as far as Joal. In this port, Joal, there are many, again, white men in status, right? People who are wealthy, people who have not slaves, people who are free. All of them Hebrew nation. This is what I'm trying to tell you. These are Portuguese Jews, so these ain't pale-skinned people. They're using white as status here, guys. And they trade with these foreigners, and some of them travel to Flanders on their ships, and they return to these parts with the said foreigners, and others with their Indias del Sao Pero. Okay, this is in Portuguese. So it says David Weed has recently, oh, sorry, this is the note. So, and others with their boats who also buy from these foreigners go on to Gambia River, from whence they bring a great quantity of ivory, wax, and gold. And all of these products are sold to the aforementioned foreigners. And in this manner, all the ivory from the Senegal River to Sierra Leone, and there is a lot of it, is sold to these foreigners as it is exchanged for iron. This report, along with other detailed descriptions of the early Dutch presence in Senegambia, clearly shows the vital role played by the Jewish communities of the Petite Côte in enabling the United Provinces rapidly to challenge the Portuguese trading monopoly there. They claim that almost all of the ivory trade of Guinea to Cabo Verde, right? So again, they call it Cabo Verde, Guinea. The ivory trade in Cabo Verde had been lost to Flemish traders, maybe hyperbole. The anonymous Portuguese author of this report was apparently trying to convince Portuguese authorities to take action against the Dutch and their trading partners, the Portuguese Jews. All right, again, Portuguese Jews are swarthy, black, Negro, very dark, as well as against other foreign traders acting in the region. On the other hand, it may not be far from the truth, even allowing for exaggeration. It is clear that the alliance between Dutch merchants and Jewish New Christians or crypto Jews, Portuguese settlers on the Petite Côte, posed a problem for established Portuguese interests north of the Rio de São Domingos. They're talking about the Portuguese Catholics. They had ports there too. They're the ones they're talking about. Okay, they're trying to call whites, but it was Hebrew people, and we Hebrew people are swarthy. In this context, one can understand the tensions between the Portuguese Christian traders, whether new Christians or old, these are the Catholics, at Rio Grande Cachu and port of São Domingos, and the Portuguese Jews of the Petite Côte, who along with their recently arrived Dutch allies constituted a serious threat to the economic status of the Portuguese. Dutch traders were joining the French and the English, who had been there for decades. The newcomers eventually put an end to Portuguese attempts at monopoly in the markets north of Cacho. The synagogues by 1612, many of them Jews of Petite Côte, were quite open about their religious identity. At least when in their own communities of Porto, Joal, and Joal. Nevertheless, the Christians who informed on them to vicariate of São Domingos knew far less about their religious services than they did about their participation in trade. The synagogues, for example, were known to a few of the Inquisition informants, but only from a distance. These informants generally claimed to have listened to the ceremonies with hymns in Portuguese or in Hebrew they could not understand, from afar. They also agreed that the rabbi of all the Jews was Jacob Peregrino. In Joal, the temple was located in the house where the rabbi lived. The house belonged to Diego Vaz Ovello. Peregrino's presence is also mentioned in Porto de Joal. Given the presence of practicing Jews at Joal and Porto de Joal, there would have been a need for those synagogues. This fact is in itself significant, for it implies that both trading centers were home to Jewish populations at least 10 adult men. João Mendes, an old Christian who had been in Joal and who visited Porto several times between June 1611 and March 1612, was the best informed witness about religious sociability, right? So he's a Catholic, an old Christian. He confirmed that in Porto the Jews met for their religious observances in the house of Simão Rodrigues de Iboura. So he's like a spy, he's kind of snitching. There may have been another rabbi to answer to spiritual needs of the communities. Manuel Peregrino, Jacob Peregrino's son, one witness who knew something about the private life of Jacob, wrote that father and son were both great rabbis, ambos grandes rabbis. Of course, this mention is in itself is insufficient to confirm the existence of two rabbis. Of Manuel's early activities, we have only the word of witness whose testimony is sometimes inaccurate. Antonio de Silva Quota. He reports that Manuel was the master of his rights and Navarrese on killing all kinds of meat. Antonio de Silva also says that there was another man who was called the Doctor Rabbi, but he does not add his name. In the 1630s, Manuel did indeed serve as mohel, and at that time, after his father's death, at an unknown date, he would have succeeded him as a rabbi, conducting burials and involving himself in the theological discussions with Christian visitors to Porto de El. Ritual spaces, including synagogues, are also described by Inquisition witnesses. While these descriptions are too general to give more than a hint of the physical form of the buildings, they provide confirmation of the establishment of the two separate religious communities. Writing of Joal, one witness asserts that they had seen the said Jews lodged in the house of Diego Vaz de Souza, and he had heard many times from the other Catholics who were there in Joal that there in Vaz's house they carried out their ceremonies and prayers, and he saw a separate house from the one of Diego Vaz where they did the same ceremonies, which however he, the witness, had never seen performed. It is relevant that the synagogue was located in a separate structure. Another witness had heard his Jewish neighbors praying out loud and carrying out their ceremonies late on Fridays, and he observed that they kept Saturday like the Christian Sunday. Descriptions of the synagogue itself were, however, quite sketchy and offered only a few tantalizing details. They, the Jews, right, we're talking about swarthy black folks from Portugal, maintain their houses in Joal and Porto Alegre, we're talking about in West Africa, right? And the house they maintain in Joal has a pasadizo from the house of Diego Vaz de Souza, the elder, in which house of Diego Vaz they had been on many occasions in conversation, and they eat and drink. And in their house, these Jews prayed and they did their ceremonies. The mention of a walkway is intriguing. This feature may have served solely to make communication easier and to protect the worshippers from the sun and from the rain as they moved from Vaz's house to their synagogue. On the other hand, the existence of a passageway, together with the fact that the synagogue was situated within Vaz's housing compound, implies that even though, according to church informants, the Jews of Joal publicly proclaimed their religious identity, they nevertheless made some effort to locate the synagogue away from inquisitive eyes. As a matter of fact, the witnesses report that there were also a number of secret Jews living on the Petite Côte, but this concern with privacy was no different from other synagogues, even in free lands. Additional architecture details were given by the witness Francisco Gonçalves of Lisbon. So these are all the spies and informants, right? They're telling the Catholics what's going on, right? They're trying to snitch on these crypto Jews, right? So when these men came from Flanders, they gathered in his house, Diego Vaz in Joal, and on the inside of the tapados, example, against the protective barrier surrounding the housing compound, they made a synagogue to use until their departure. In 16th and 17th century Portuguese narratives, the term tapados generally refers to protective barriers that surrounded housing compounds or entire villages. These were made of interwoven branches. The synagogue was thus located just within the compound wall. It would have been a temporary structure to be used while men from Flanders were visiting Joal. There is no documentary evidence of a later permanent structure. One other architectural structure belonging to the Petite Côte Jews is mentioned in the Inquisition archives. Like the synagogue in Joal, this structure was built of temporary materials that would have been readily available on the coast. The description indicates that its primary function was to create privacy, providing protection from the eyes of strangers. According to this source, the trader Simon de Torres had lived in compound of Pedro Rodriguez. They lodged within a tapado, a compound, but in different houses where they would converse from time to time. Taken together, these brief descriptions of synagogues and tapados suggest that although many of the men of Joal did not hide their Jewish identity, they nevertheless maintained discretion when it came to prayer and religious discussions. Of course, one may assume that these men could have chosen the moments before and after services in the privacy of Diego Vaz's compound to talk about everything of everyday life, faith, books, women, and business, the latter quite naturally related to trade with Rotterdam and Amsterdam. Inquisition records make only passing reference to the dietary practices of the Jews of Porto, and Joal, unlike records from actual Inquisition trials, where abstinence from pork and fasting were interpreted as priori evidence that individuals were secretly practicing Jewish faith. The testimony collected by Bartolomeo Rebelo in São Domingos makes little mention of food. In ordering his investigation, Rebelo asked the witnesses if they knew whether those who brought together the Jews let them perform their Jewish ceremonies, including their prayers and killing chickens, which they eat in accord with their customs, on their tables, and they do not offer grace to God as is the custom in the Church of Rome. In fact, the Jewish ritual slaughter of chickens, degolar gallinas judaicamente, is mentioned by some of the witnesses, and there would have been a kosher butcher for that purpose, the previously mentioned Manuel Peregrino. Closely associated with dietary custom is the ritually prescribed consumption of wine, associated with specific ceremonies such as Passover. Given the vague knowledge of Jewish rituals that is reflected in the Inquisition sources from San Domingos, it is hardly surprising that the ritual consumption of wine is not specifically mentioned. Wine was also present in Christian services, and it was product considered vital in the diet of any Portuguese and overseas establishments at that time. On the Senegambian coast, it was one of the main imports, consumed not only by Africans, even by many Muslims, but also by Portuguese who lived there. In fact, explicit mention is made of wine as a trade item, imported from the island of Las Palmas, the Canary Islands, on Flemish ships. The anonymous author of the Memoria stated another carack came from Flanders in which two men arrived. They were from Tomard, and with this ship they were transporting wine from the island of Palma. Large quantities of wine were certainly imported. In the absence of more precise information, one may assume that some of this wine was consumed during the Passover, Sedar, and on other religious occasions. No other details about Jewish ceremonies exist in the Inquisition records, but the ritual canon would have been followed as in any Sephardic community. At least there was an effort to follow prescribed ritual. Jerónimo de Cunha, canon of Santiago Island and former vicar of the Guinea coast, right? That's in Cape Verde, Santiago Island, who wrote in 1615, A Relação de Coisas de Guinea, or the Relations of the Matters of Guinea, or an account of the matters of Guinea, stated that the public Jews lived and kept the law of Moses in their ceremonies as in their clothing. The statement of the former vicar matches the extensive report given to João Mendes to the Inquisition of Lisbon, and it goes well beyond the more or less stereotyped accusations of Judaism commonly found in such documentation of wearing a clean shirt on Saturdays and of work on Sundays. Mendes claimed to have been an eyewitness to the regular Friday ceremonies in Joal and in Porto, where he had a shorter stay. He also described the Shabbat when the men walked in bands with each other, sometimes all together, sometimes in groups, without doing any kind of work on the said Saturdays. But the account goes beyond the forms of sociability, and finally we are given a detailed description of a ritual. And it says, and he used to see everyone assemble most Friday afternoons during the time he stayed in the house of the said Diego Vaz de Souza, and they prayed from some books in Castilian, every man praying unto himself, and he could not understand what they prayed, or what was contained in the said books, and they continued to pray until the sun set, and thence went out at night dressed in white shirts and better clothes than those they wore in the rest of the week. Joel Mendes asked Manuel Tavares, a mulatto, a mulatto born on Santiago Island, a mulatto from Cape Verde. Listen to this, a mulatto, John Mendes, a mulatto. Oh, he asked Manuel Tavares, a mulatto, right, Tavares, a mulatto born on Cape Verde Island. Why is he a mulatto, Do you have Indian in him? Cape Verde Island, He was born in Santiago Island and a retainer, criado, of Felipe de Souza or Corcovado to steal one of these prayer books, which he subsequently described in great detail to the inquisitors. So they're over there spying, stealing their books, trying to get them in trouble, like the Catholics. So it says, they said the said book was written in round quarter and a half-finger high script, bound in soft light brown calfskin. Its title read, composed by Jacob Israel, The Meditation of a Believer. It was entirely written in Castilian, and among other things he remembers reading in it, there was the daily tefillah, another prayer of Camoedo, and other similar things which he can't remember. Another witness confirms that Felipe de Souza also owned this book, while João Mendes reported that Luis Fernandez Duarte owned a calendar of Queen Esther, which listed Jewish holidays and prayers. The existence of Jewish books brought from Holland to the West African coast to support religious practices raises the broader possibility of the existence of private libraries, all right? So these Jewish books brought from Holland, from Europe, not from Palestine, not from the fake Holy Land, like a lot of West Africans or Pan-Africans try to say. No, they go at them from Europe, from Holland to West Africa. In these libraries, other books, whether specifically Jewish in content or not, forbidden in Portugal by inquisitorial censorship, could have been freely consulted. So they got books that were banned in Portugal, right? At that time, Amsterdam printing houses frequently published this kind of book because the people printing these books, the publishers, the printers, were Sephardic Jews themselves, just like Manasseh ben Israel, who had a different Christian name, Manuel de Souza or something like that. So at that time, Amsterdam printed these books, and it was not a coincidence that one of the articles of the questionnaire submitted by the vicar to the witness read, do you know if some people gave them, the newcomers from Flanders, support, giving them help in their houses and reading their books without the approval of the bishop, doing it without scruple? Demography. And I think this is the dismount, right? This is the last part of this chapter, right? And it says here demography. To provide even an approximate estimate of the Sephardic population of Porto Diel and of Joal constitutes a difficult challenge. On the one hand, the extant written accounts refer to several practicing Jews who are not identified by name. Those who are named, 28 men and 2 children, offer at least a point of reference, but one that may in fact represent no more than the tip of the iceberg. In a much larger population that included crypto Jews and mestizo families, Mestizo, On the other hand, we are dealing with a population that by the very nature of its commercial activity regularly moved between these two ports of the coast, or the costa, as it was known. Cristaos novos residentes no dito Porto Ele no es Joal, o era uno era u otro, causing the population of these ports to fluctuate. Nonetheless, Joel Mendes listed 8 and 7 individuals, respectively, in 2 localities. He recalled that they come together to participate in important religious ceremonies. These figures are actually less than the median of 10 adult males, so clearly Mendes missed some individuals. Furthermore, in the case of Joel, one may assume that there were at least 10 men in 1612, since 12 Biblias Hebraicas were brought there expressively by Jacob Peregrino. With regard to Porto Diel, one may go somewhat further and obtain an approximate figure of the size of the Sephardic population, including both Portuguese and Luso-Africans, if we return to Sebastião Fernandes Casal's description of Porto Diel from about 1608. 2 things are apparent. First, the total number of inhabitants approached 100 Portuguese vecinos, right? That's 100 neighbors or families, and they're saying Africans, but remember it said Negroes and Negroes. These Negroes could be Indians, it could be anybody. These Negroes could just be any servant, just like they were calling them white. So the original source said Negroes, remember, it didn't say Africans. And second, there was a wave of practicing Jews newly arrived from the United Provinces, and rather poorly received by the Portuguese who dwelled there, but whose numbers Casal does not specify. In addition, we do know from the account of the Dutch merchant Peter van den Broek, who spent time on the coast of November 1609 and who was familiar with the terrain and with the Portuguese commerce there, that there were in Porto de El 30 Portuguese and mestizos, although obviously the Luso-African population was far smaller than the Wolof population. These figures coincide with those given by Padre Manuel Alvarez, who in his Ethiopia Menor of circa 1615 asserts that there is in Porto de El, o Provaçao de Português, obra de 12 a de 15 casas, a short anonymous account whose authorship may be attributed to Joal Council of Antwerp, and referring to 1613 and 1614 cast new light on the Sephardic population. This important passage is worth citing in its entirety, okay? So it says here that in Cape Verde, right, in Cape Verde towards Cabo Rojo, or Red Cape, right, Cabo Rojo, on the mainland of the African coast at about 15 degrees latitude, 2 or 3 leagues from the sea, and the next to a large river, where those of Holland have created an escala for commerce from all of these coasts. There are 15 or 20 houses of Portuguese Jews who have a synagogue, and to which many new Christians, right, or Christian Jews and Jews come with various places attracted by trade and to make an scale for all the trade goods that they exchange and gather from all the coasts of Guinea, Congo, and Angola to send to Holland. A rabbi of this synagogue is named Jacques Pellegrin or Diego Pellegrino, and some of them are from Lisbon, Abrantes, and others are from other parts of the Ribatejo, a region of Portugal, north of the Tagus River. However, they couldn't tell me the names other than the rabbi. And some Cansuel's report seems to refer to Porto de El or a nearby and closely affiliated population. The text confirms the importance of this town as a center for Dutch-Portuguese trade. It's just them, basically, guys. For their trade, the Sephardic Jews trade, their monopoly, not only in Senegambia, but as part of a commercial network that included the Gulf of Guinea and Angola. Like I said, a lot of Cape Verdeans in Angola. And Angola was actually colonized by Brazilians. Angola was first colonized by Brazilians. Right? Whether that was Portuguese Jews and American Indian descendants and all that, both. But it was colonized by Brazilians. So, Cansuel's text also provides us the only numerical estimate of the Judaizing population on the coast, 15 or 20 casas. If we consider this together with the number of Portuguese and mestizos referred to in 1606 and with the number of Portuguese houses estimated in 1615 by Manuel Alvarez, even making allowance for some exaggeration on the part of the Inquisition witness, there can be no doubt that 1. The percentage of Portuguese Jews in Port El was already significant following the arrival of a first group in 1608, and 2nd, the Sephardic community had certainly grown to become a majority of the Luso-African population. You see, so that is your Luso-Africans, because the Sephardic Jews went to West Africa and mixed with the local people. Not because these are Africans who became Portuguese and living in Port. No, that's a hijacked story. So they went there, they became a majority of the Luso-African population following the second wave of immigrants from Amsterdam in 1612. To arrive at a concrete estimate of their numbers remains, however, very difficult. If we take as a reference point the calculations of Francisco de Andrade, who in his 1582 Relação translates 50 casas de brancos in Rio Grande and into more than 100 brancos, it is not clear what he means by whites. That's what I was saying, guys. When they're saying brancos or whites, they mean in status. They mean owners, wealthy people, not slaves, not in bondage, not indentured servants. So that's why he's saying it is not clear what he means by whites. We may extrapolate in the case of Porto de El, 1613, a population of about 30 or 40 Portuguese Jews, not counting the highly likely existence of undetermined numbers of mestizo families. All right, and we keep going. I think this is this man. Now it says European women in the West African diaspora. That's the hijack. I think we might have to add the hijack a little bit here. It says very little is known about the women in the Jewish communities of the Petite Côte. This may reflect in part the bias of the Inquisition witnesses, traders and members of the Luso African community themselves. These Christian Portuguese belonged to a society composed heavily of immigrant men, many of whom either married or lived with local African women. So you see, they're mixing with the local women just like they did in the Americas, right? They mixed with the American Indian women. So are these local African women all Africans, or are they mixing with some of them in Cape Verde, like they're saying Negro? A lot of these Negroes are Indian women. So they were not particularly attentive to the role of the women among the Senegambian Jews. The few extant references are to European wives. Jacob Peregrino, for example, had been married but was evidently widowed by the time he and his later son settled on the Senegalese coast. By and large, Jewish women are passed over in silence in the Inquisition testimony. But a number of letters written by the families of the Jews living on the coast have survived in the Inquisition files. These letters, which were apparently aboard a vessel that was intercepted, were delivered to the Holy Tribunal. They were all written by women, either mothers to their sons or sisters to their brothers. Okay? These are the first private letters written to Portuguese traders on the Guinea coast that the present authors have ever seen. They are a small but precious body of private correspondence. The pleasant style with which these women express their feelings for their absent, beloved men is quite moving. These documents are clear evidence that the travel to Senegambia separated the men from the women, given the danger of such travel, and given the great mobility of Jewish traders across the Sephardic network of Europe, Africa, and Spanish America. This cachet of letters must stand for a much larger body of personal correspondence that has not been preserved, all right? So, you know, the role of women, of course, they always leave this out, is what they're saying. Yeah, we have a whole video. Well, first of all, thank you for the donation, Qua Mega Man. We have many videos we've shown the actual definition from Black's Law's Dictionary of free white. All right, again, let's just pull it up. That's what I'm saying, guys. Guys, I've been here 8 years, man. 8 years showing sources, man. 8 years showing sources, man. We're gonna show another one. We're gonna show it again. All right, here it is. Right here it is. Okay, here it is. Free white includes all European Jews, so that includes all, you know, Sephardic Jews, right? And it also includes Moorish inhabitants of Spain and Portugal. Free whites includes Moors. Free whites includes Moors of Spain and Portugal, right? So when they're saying whites or brancos, it doesn't mean complexion, guys, because it does not mean Caucasian race or Aryan race. It's literally telling you in Black's Law Dictionary, 4th edition. All right, thank you for that, man. Shout out to the reference, to Quad Mega Man. All right, so go back. Oh, sorry, I'm not even showing it, am I? I'm not showing it. My fault. My fault. Here it is. Here it is. We're almost at the end of the reading, guys, but here it is. So again, I've shown this a lot. All right, I have a whole video on it. Free white includes all Moors and all Jews. So free whites would include Sephardic Jews and Moorish Muslims, okay? Free whites. That's why these so-called whites come into the American colony. We already broke it down. These were actually black folks. Okay? All right. Let's go back to the source because we're almost done. So the existence of two thriving communities of Portuguese Jews on Senegal's Petite Côte at the beginning of the 17th century is a remarkable illustration of one small part of the Sephardic commercial diaspora, a diaspora that developed in response to the forced conversion of Portuguese Jewry and the subsequent establishment of the Inquisition in Portugal. By the beginning of the 17th century, Amsterdam had assumed a pivotal role in the development of the Sephardic commercial diaspora. From their inception, the Jewish communities of Porto and Joal were closely linked both with Lisbon and with Portuguese community in Amsterdam. Okay. And that is the end of this chapter. All right. It was pretty long, actually. Pretty long, man. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Again, a whole other history that we got to get into. This is important. Trust me. You guys are going to see how it all ties in when we start getting deeper and deeper with the research. All right, you got to understand the trading networks, the merchants, who own your chips. All right, again, this book was The Forgotten Diaspora, Jewish Communities in West Africa and the Making of the Atlantic World by Peter Mark and José de Silva Horta. All right, we read and we reviewed chapter 1 of this book. Appreciate you guys sticking around all the way to the end of the video. Making the time to be here on your Tuesday. And if you were here through the whole reading, appreciate you. Make sure to like, share the video, subscribe. We're gonna definitely continue reading from the book. It got other stories from other parts of Africa, and you know, just relate this with all the other research we've done. Again, they have whitewashed history, guys, and we have been told a whole false narrative when it comes to the African slave trade and who Europeans were, who the colonists were, who you are, and who you are, right? And who you are. We're gonna go out again with that song, I am everyone and no one, yet I am someone. All right, it kind of relates to what we're talking about today. Shout out to Matt Preacher for that song, the outro and the intro, and shout out to Science for the background music we've been hearing this whole time. Again, I appreciate you guys coming through all the way, sticking all the way to the end today, to the reading. I'm gonna keep going, guys. We got a lot more info to go through. All right. Thank you. And you see the history here, right? So you can understand why I'm showing you. Why am I reading this book to you now? Like, you see, we have a better understanding of Sephardic Jews, who they were. Now we understand who's really settling West Africa right here first. All right. And then even later, the American Colonization Society, right? Why is DNA test show relation? You got to understand. This is deep what I'm trying to show you here. All right. Just think about that. Much love and respect. Pura vida, mi gente. Wow.
My dog. Go and tell them mad preacher, philosophical speaker. Bim! On the fabric of a blank projection, a conceptual murder of the soul's reflection. They write the law, then erase the essence, reducing a God to a physical presence. Paper genocide, the slaughter of the formless, finding the infinite, making us harmless. A birth certificate anchors the timeless mind to a fiction of state, to a cage design. They file a spirit under corporate names, a holographic slaughter in bureaucratic games. But you cannot murder what was never born. I read the pages of the narrative torn. I am everyone and no one, yet I am someone. I am everyone and no one, yet I am someone. The ledger tries to quantify the boundless spark, leaving mid silhouettes frozen in the dark. They execute the archetype to feed the machine, a digital eclipse of the space between. The contract planes, ownership of vital breath, an ontological warfare, a semantic death. But the witness remains when the pages burn to the primal awareness, the atoms return. We are not the ink, we are the space on the page, breaking the spell of the literal cage. The parchment is off, the illusion is done, the many merge back into the absolute one. I am every none and no one, yet I am someone. I am every none and no one, yet I am someone. Oh, monets trapped in the matrix lyrics of the legal fiction. A paper genocide executed through strict restriction. The strawman is birth, a synthetic astral double, biting the mana to the lower realms of trouble. They seal the demiurge's ledger with a silver wax, taxing the breath of life to bureaucratic attacks. A semantic assassination on a parchment scroll, replacing the infinite logos with a numbered soul. The birth certificate acts as an necrotic shroud, an ontological eclipse hiding the witness in the cloud. But the Gnosis fractures the geometry of the state as I dissolve the contracts of this artificial fate. I am everyone and no one, yet I am someone. I am everyone and no one, yet I am someone. Of a burning Akashic tree, an attempt to codify the currents of the cosmic sea. They use the alphabet to cast an execution spell, locking the primordial spark inside the legal cell. This is the slaughter of the formless by the rigid line, a holographic murder of the template divine. At the voice shouts loud at the notary Silva, no the parchment can dominate what is real. I am the uncut black before the glyphs were made, the immutable witness when the paper shadows fade. The bureaucracy crumbles under Kabbalistic fire as the monarch rises higher than the tall.